If you don't get the audio or the video, let me know. Otherwise, we'll try to go with this.
Okay.
I think that's the right way to do it.
Welcome to Pest and Pest Control. This lesson, presented by Dr. Michael Weaver, Professor and Director of Virginia Tech Pesticide Programs, and Patricia Hipkins, Senior Research Associate and Assistant Pesticide Coordinator of Virginia Tech Pesticide Programs, is adapted from Applying Pesticides Correctly, Private Applicator Supplement, Unit 1.
We hear it but don't see it.
Correct identification of pests and a knowledge of their development and behavior are keys to effective pest control. Pests are grouped into 4 categories. Here, insects and insect-like pests, along with plant disease agents, will be presented by Mike Weaver in Part 1, and weeds and vertebrate pests will be presented by Pat Hipkins in Part 2. Now here's Mike to begin Part 1 with insects and insect-like pests.
We can't.
I'd like to talk to you today about insects and insect-like pests.
John, we
There are
can.
more kinds of insects on Earth than all other living animals combined. They're found practically everywhere, including in the soil, water, and in the air. They're found inside plants, and they're found inside animals. They eat almost anything, including our food. Most insects can be divided into 3 categories. About 99% of all insects.
Did I change it, make it where it was available?
We're seeing the camera from the back of your classroom, so we're seeing the board from 20 feet away.
Okay, let me see what I can do. Let me restart it and I'll figure out what we're doing.
Okay.
Be divided into 3 categories. About 99% of all insects and insect-like pests have ecological importance, meaning they neither harm or help people, but they're crucial to the food web. The rest fall into categories of either beneficial insects or destructive insects.
Still having trouble with this thing.
All adult insects have 2 physical characteristics in common. They have 3 pairs of jointed legs, and they have 3 distinct body regions: the head, the thorax, and the abdomen.
Oh, you paused it. Can you re-aim that camera to get it to focus on the screen a little bit more? Because that's better than looking at Tyler's t-shirt.
Well, I'm trying to figure out, there should be a way to come straight out of the display to you. And I got it to work one day and I haven't been able to get it.
You've actually had it work a couple of days so far.
Yeah, and I thought I was doing it exactly the same way.
I think
it was about 15 different buttons and
Yep, I blame Tyler.
Blame the school system for not using Skype.
No, I don't want Skype. All right, I'm going to try it again, Tom.
Pesticide Programs, and Patricia Hipkins, Senior Research Associate and Assistant Pesticide Coordinator of Virginia Tech Pesticide Programs, is adapted from Applying Pesticides Correctly, Private Applicator Supplement, Unit 1. Correct identification of pests and a knowledge of their development and behavior are keys to effective pest control. Pests are grouped into 4 categories. Here, insects and insect-like pests, along with plant disease agents, will be presented by Mike Weaver in Part 1, and weeds and vertebrate pests will be presented by Pat Hipkins in Part 2. Now here's Mike to begin Part 1 with insects and insect-like pests.
I'd like to talk to you today about insects and insect-like pests. There are more kinds of insects on Earth than all other living animals combined. They're found practically everywhere, including in the soil, water, and in the air. They're found inside plants, and they're found inside animals. They eat almost anything, including our food. Most insects can be divided into 3 categories. About 99% of all insects and insect-like pests have ecological importance, meaning they neither harm or help people, but they're crucial to the food web. The rest fall into categories of either beneficial insects or destructive insects. All adult insects have two physical characteristics in common. They have 3 pairs of jointed legs, and they have 3 distinct body regions: the head,
That got it. Keep rolling.
Say we lost it?
You lost it again. It's been working for a few seconds, then it goes away.
Well, I didn't touch a thing.
Which I don't know. When I said something to try to tell you that it worked in the switch camera views, when it came back, it went to your camera instead of the computer. I'm going to mute our mic and you can try it again, and
okay,
we'll see if that'll.
Let's try that and see.
thorax, and the abdomen.
All right, that's going to mean I have to control it all.
The head has antenna, eyes, and mouth parts. Antennae vary in size and shape and can be helpful in insect identification. Insects have compound eyes made up of many individual eyes. These compound eyes enable insects to detect motion, but they probably cannot see clear images.
All right, we lose it. Lost it again, huh?
Never had it.
Never had it.
What was that?
I'll try again, see what we got.
Okay.
The 4 general types of mouth parts are chewing, piercing, sucking, sponging, and siphoning.
Each image here is a short video clip that can be viewed by clicking the image. After viewing the clips, please continue to the next slide.
Working for now. Okay. All right.
The thorax contains 3 pairs of legs, and if present, the wings. The wings can be particularly important in insect identification because they vary in their texture, in their sizes, and their shapes. And they have certain patterns of veins that are particularly helpful in differentiating from one insect to another. The abdomen is usually composed of 11 segments, but 8 or fewer segments may be visible. Along each side of most of the segments are openings called spiracles, through which the insect breathes. In some insects, the tip end of the abdomen has tail-like appendages. The life cycles of insects vary from species to species. Most insects reproduce as a result of males fertilizing females. However, the females of some aphids and parasitic wasps produce eggs without mating. In some of these insect species, males are unknown. Few insects give birth to living young. However, life for most insects begins as an egg. The insect life cycles are affected by temperature, humidity, light, and the food supply. The series of changes through which an insect passes in its growth from egg to adult is called metamorphosis. The different types of metamorphosis are no metamorphosis, gradual metamorphosis, incomplete metamorphosis, and complete metamorphosis. In the next few slides, you'll see more details on what we mean by metamorphosis. Insects that go through no metamorphosis, as in this example, include silverfish, firegrass, and springtails. These insects grow larger with each successive instar until they reach maturity, and the food and habitats of the young nymphs are similar to those of the adults. Insects that go through gradual metamorphosis include cockroaches, box elder bugs, lice, termites, aphids, and scales. These insects pass through 3 distinct stages of development before reaching maturity: the egg, the nymph, and the adult. The change of their bodies is gradual, and the wings become fully developed only in the adult stage. Insects that go through incomplete metamorphosis include dragonflies, mayflies, and stoneflies. These insects pass through 3 stages of development: the egg, the naiads, and the adult. The adult is similar to the young, but the naiads are aquatic. Insects that go through complete metamorphosis include beetles, butterflies, flies, mosquitoes, fleas, bees, and ants. These insects pass through four stages of development: the egg, the larva, the pupa, and then into the adult stage. The young insects are entirely different from the adults in appearance, and in many cases feed on different foods. Other kinds of pest organisms are similar to insects in many ways, but they're not classified as insects. Most of these pests resemble insects and have similar life cycles. All of them cause similar damage, and usually can be managed with the same techniques and materials to manage insects. The arachnids is one group in which they can be easily confused with insects, but if you look at them closely, they have some very distinct characteristics, such as they have eight legs, or 4 pairs of legs, and they only have 2 body regions. They're wingless and they lack antennae. Their metamorphosis is gradual and includes both larva and nymphal stages. The eggs hatch into larvae, which actually have 6 legs. They become nymphs, which then have 8 legs, and then adults. Ticks and mites have modified piercing-sucking mouthparts. Spiders and scorpions have chewing mouthparts. Some of the examples we have here include mites, as pictured here. The ticks, of course, here you can see very distinctively the 8 legs, as is the case with the spider, and the scorpion. Another group are the crustaceans. And the crustaceans include the sow-bugs, pill-bugs, and the wood lice, which have 10 or more legs. They're wingless and contain only one segmented body region. They have 2 pairs of antennae and chewing mouthparts. Sow-bugs and pill-bugs have a hard, protective, shell-like covering and are related to the aquatic lobsters, crabs, and crayfish. The metamorphosis is gradual, and there may be up to 20 instars before adulthood is reached. The next group are the centipedes and the millipedes. The centipedes, as seen here, have 1 pair of legs per segment. They have chewing mouthparts, and some species can inflict painful bites. The millipedes have 2 pairs of legs per segment and are cylindrical like an earthworm. The bodies are wingless, as is the case with the centipede. The antennae are short with the millipede, and the mouthparts are comb-like. Millipedes feed on decaying organic matter, seeds, bulbs, and roots, while in the case of the centipede, it's quite an effective predator in some cases. There are no metamorphoses in centipedes and millipedes, and so they don't really change except in size between the point of hatching and reaching the adult stage. Nematodes are small, usually microscopic roundworms. The mouthparts of those that feed on plants, of which we call plant parasitic nematodes, by the way, are like a hollow needle. That hollow needle is used to puncture plant cells and feed on the contents. That needle technically is called a stylet, by the way. Nematodes may develop and feed either inside or outside of a plant. They move with an eel-like motion in water, even water as thin as the film of moisture around plant cells or soil particles. Because plant parasitic nematodes are not visible to the naked eye, they're easily spread from place to place through our activities. The life cycle of a nematode includes an egg, several larval stages, and an adult. Most larvae look like the adults but are smaller. In adverse conditions, the females of some species, such as the root knot nematode, which is seen here infesting the roots of a plant, and the cyst nematode, form an inactive resistant form called a cyst. The cyst is a hard, leathery, egg-filled body of the dead female. It's difficult to penetrate with pesticides, and a cyst may provide protection for several hundred eggs for as long as 10 years. The mollusks are another group of insect-like pests, a very large group of land and water animals. They have soft, unsegmented bodies and often are protected by a hard shell. Examples include the slugs, the oysters and clams, the barnacles, and the snails. The most important ones to pest control are probably the land snails and slugs, which are soft-bodied and have two pairs of antennae-like structures. Their bodies are smooth and elongated. The snails have a spiral-shaped shell in which they can withdraw for protection, either when disturbed or when the weather conditions are unfavorable, while the slugs don't have a shell, so they must seek protection in damp places. They both deposit eggs in moist, dark places. The young mature in a year or so, depending on the species, and the adults live for several years. They overwinter in sheltered areas, and they can remain active all year round in warm regions and in greenhouses. They can be quite destructive, and their damage is often confused with insect damage, although you can manage them with similar techniques and materials as insects. One of the most important things before applying control is to be able to identify a particular pest. And one of the key clues to identification is the type of damage that these pests can create. So the various pests have different methods in which they might damage plants. One group of pests are the leaf eaters. And these include such insects and insect-like pests as gypsy moths, cabbage worms, beetles, snails, and slugs. And they damage plants by removing most or all of the leaves, leaving the plant stunted and unproductive. Another group are internal feeders. And these are insects and insect-like pests that feed and develop inside the fruit, grain, and other plant parts. Usually they're in the larval stage when they cause the damage. And of course the larvae are feeding for quite some time inside the plants. Some pests pupate inside their hosts. And because they're inside the plant, these pests often cause significant damage before they can be detected. They're also more difficult to control when they're inside the plant. Internal feeders include boll weevils, rice weevils, birch leaf miners, and codling moths. The next group are the stalk and stem borers. The larval stage of some insects and insect-like pests bore into stalks and stems. This harms the plant by weakening the stalk or the stem and by preventing water and food from flowing freely within the plant. Weakened plants may blow over or lodge, or wilt as a result of the damage. Examples of these borers include the European corn borer, squash vine borers, and the dogwood borers. Some insects and insect-like pests have sucking mouthparts that allow them to suck juices from plants. The activity of these pests can lead to curling and stunning of leaves and stems, wilting caused by the blockage of water-conducting tissues, and dead areas caused by toxins the pests inject during feeding. As they feed, plant-sucking pests may also spread plant disease organisms. Some plant diseases can be controlled by controlling the insect pests that cause their spread. While they suck on the plants, aphids and similar insects excrete honeydew that drips onto the lower parts of the plant. A fungus that causes a black sooty mold often grows on this sticky material. Other examples of plant-sucking insects include stink bugs and squash bugs. The next group are the cutworms. The cutworms are insect pest larvae that cut off plants at the soil surface. Cutworms are often hard to detect and control because they feed at night and they stay under the ground during the day. They're notorious for feeding on young seedling plants, and that feeding can be quite damaging. The next group are the underground feeders. Many insects and insect-like pests cause damage by feeding on plant roots. Root-feeding pests interfere with the plant's water and nutrient uptake. They can cause dead spots in turf grass, goosenecking in corn, and poor color, stunning, and loss of vigor in a wide range of crops. Some underground feeders are the larval stages of insects. These include the white grubs, corn rootworm, black vine weevil, and many kinds of fly maggots. Another kind of underground feeder are the nematodes. And although some types of nematodes attack above ground plant parts, most plant parasitic nematode species feed on or in the roots. They may feed in one location or they may constantly move throughout the roots. Underground pests are often difficult to identify because they cannot be seen without uprooting the plants. Nematodes are too small to see with the naked eye. Their presence is often identified from the characteristic damage they cause or from experience with previous infestations. Confirmed identification of plant parasitic nematodes requires sending samples of soil, roots, and other affected plant parts to a laboratory for identification. The next group are pests of animals. The insects, ticks, mites, and similar pests that attack people and other animals have mouth parts similar to those of the plant feeders, but they suck blood and animal fluids rather than plant fluids. Mosquitoes, lice, and ticks are blood-sucking pests. Cattle grubs, the ox warble of cows, and the bot fly of horses are internal feeding insects. Face flies, house flies, and gnats annoy and cause discomfort. Some insects and insect-like pests inject disease-causing organisms such as bacteria, viruses, and parasites into the animals that they're feeding on. In the United States, mosquitoes carry encephalitis, and ticks carry a variety of diseases such as Rocky Mountain spotted fever and Lyme disease. Now we're going to talk about pest control strategies. To successfully control insects and insect-like pests, you need a thorough knowledge of their habitats, feeding habits, and life cycle stages. Environmental conditions such as humidity, temperature, and availability of food can affect the length of the life cycle by altering the growth rate of insects. A favorable environment, usually warm and humid, can shorten the time of development from egg to adult. You must carefully monitor pest populations and take management action at a time when you are most likely to succeed. Timing may be essential, for example, when you need to control an internal feeder before it enters a plant. It is particularly useful to know the life cycle stages in which pests are most vulnerable. The egg and pupal stages are stages in which the insect are generally difficult to control because these stages are inactive. The pests are not feeding, they're mobile, and often are in a hard-to-reach areas such as under the ground, in cocoons, or cases, or in cracks and crevices. The early larval and nymphal stages are when the insects are small and active and very vulnerable. So this would be the most ideal time to achieve the best pest control. The late instar and adult stages may be controlled with moderate success. But because of their size, insects are easiest to see in the stage, but they can also be very difficult to control. And they can cause quite a bit of damage in this stage. But larger insects are often more resistant to pesticides, and adults already may have laid their eggs for another generation. So it's very important to try to focus your control time to those early larval and nymphal stages. Control insects and similar pests may involve any of three basic pest control objectives. Control is usually aimed at suppression of pests to a point where their presence or damage level is acceptable. Prevention and eradication are usually only in relatively small confined areas or in programs designed to keep foreign pests out of a new area and may not be particularly effective otherwise. Host resistance is an important control method. Some crops and animals and structures resist insects and similar pests better than others. Some varieties of crops and wood are immune to certain pests. Use of resistant types helps keep pest populations below harmful levels by making the environment less favorable for the pests. Biotechnologists and plant breeders are using genetic engineering to build pest resistance into plants. The protein crystal in Bacillus thuringiensis, BT, that is toxic to many caterpillars, for example, has been incorporated into some plants. Leaf-feeding insects that feed on leaves containing the BT protein often will die, making insecticide applications unnecessary. Biological control is a control method that uses natural substances such as living organisms or substances from living organisms to control pest populations. Biological control measures for insects include a variety of different methods. One method is the use of predators and parasites. Most pests have natural enemies, like parasitic wasps or lady beetles, that can be used against the pests to help control pest populations. Another control measure is the use of sterile males. Sterile males can be reared in a laboratory, then released in infested areas to mate with native females. These matings produce infertile eggs or sterile offspring and help reduce pest populations. Another biological control measure is the use of pheromones. Pheromones are chemicals that some pests produce naturally. Once the chemical is identified, it may be produced synthetically and used to disrupt normal reproductive behavior or to attract pests into a trap. Another measure is the use of juvenile hormones. Juvenile hormones are another type of chemical used to disrupt the normal growth of the pest. These chemicals prevent reproduction by keeping immature insects from maturing into adults. And finally, microbials. Microbial pesticides are microorganisms such as bacteria, fungi, and viruses that have been formulated into pest control products. Microbial pesticides are introduced into infested areas to subject pests to disease. Next control method we want to talk about is cultural control. In general, plants that are grown under conditions that allow them to be healthy and free of stress are usually more able to resist insect attacks than are less hardy plants. Depending on the situation, there are several specific cultural techniques that may help control insects and some more pests. These include crop rotation. And crop rotation is usually involves taking infested fields out of production and leaving them fallow, and planting an alternate crop that may deprive pests of host plants in which to feed. Another cultural control would be the use of trap crops. Other crops attractive to pests may be planted early or nearby to draw pests away from the main crop. By destroying trap crops at the proper time, you can break the reproductive cycle of pests before the desired crops are infested. Delay of planting. Delaying the planting date may reduce the population of certain pests by eliminating the plants they need for food and reproduction. And harvest timing. Not leaving crops in the field after maturity will reduce their susceptibility to pest attack. The next type of control we're going to discuss is mechanical control. And this involves the use of screens or other barriers, traps, light, and heat and cold to prevent or reduce pest populations. Examples of mechanical control involve the use of screens and other barriers. Unwanted insects are kept outside by blocking any openings with screens or by other barriers such as tightly sealed doors and windows. Barriers made of sticky material can be used to stop crawling insects, for example. Traps are sometimes used to control target pests. More often, however, they are used to survey for the presence of insect pests and to determine when the pest population is increased to a point where control is needed. Light. Light sources can be used to attract insects to traps at night. However, since not all pests are killed, the light attractant may actually help create infestations. And heat and cold. In some cases, it's possible to expose insect pests to the killing effects of heat or cold. Sanitation is perhaps one of the most important control methods, even though it's often overlooked. Tilling fields and burning crop residues soon after harvest greatly aids in the control of some insect pests as well as snails and slugs on agricultural crops. Pink bollworm infestations in cotton, for example, can be greatly reduced by plowing the field immediately after harvest. Removing litter from around buildings helps control pests that use it for breeding or shelter. Ants, termites, and some other indoor pests may be suppressed by using this technique. Sanitation is important in the control of animal parasites and filth flies. Fly control in and around barns, poultry houses, and livestock pens, for example, is greatly aided by proper manure management. Indoors, sanitation is a major method of preventing insect pest problems. Keeping surfaces clean and dry is an important factor in suppressing ant, fly, and cockroach infestations. Finally, we're going to discuss chemical control. And it should be noted here that chemical control is perhaps the last control that one would apply. Last after things like sanitation and host resistance, cultural control, and mechanical control in order to control an insect or other pests. It's important because chemical controls are expensive. They're often can be damaging to the environment. They can be a risk to the applicator, and often can affect insect and desirable non-target species populations in ways we don't want them to. So when we consider chemical control, it's important that we consider other controls. Generally, we use chemical controls in combination with these other controls. This combination is generally referred to as integrated pest management, so that we balance those controls and we base it on the presence of economic damage, and we determine whether or not we need to employ a control at all. So chemical control involves the use of chemicals such as insecticides, acaricides, and nematicides to manage pest populations. Most pesticides work by repelling and poisoning the pests, and so we'll discuss that in detail. We refer to the way that chemicals kill pests as their mode of action. And their mode of action might involve their ability to repel or poison, as we mentioned. Repellents keep pests away from an area or from a specific host, while poisons act on one or more life systems in the pest. The way poisons act vary. For example, some poisons have to be ingested or eaten, and we often call these stomach poisons. Others have to come in contact or touch the pest in some way, and we call these contact poisons. In applying insecticides, a thorough knowledge of the target pest helps determine what chemicals to use and how often to apply them. One well-timed application of an effective pesticide may provide the desired control. Sometimes repeated applications will be necessary as the infestation continues and pesticide residues break down. Insecticides and related chemicals vary in the length of time they remain active after they are applied, and this can affect how well you can control various insects. Some kill the pests they can contact at the time of application and then break down almost immediately. These are non-persistent pesticides. Others, known as persistent or residual pesticides, remain active for varying periods of time after they're applied. The active pesticide residue that these products leave behind gives continued protection against pests that may enter the area after the application is completed. In this section, we're going to talk about plant disease agents. A plant disease is any harmful condition that makes a plant different from a normal plant in its appearance or function. Plant diseases caused by biological agents, or what we call pathogens, are the ones most important for you to know about because pesticides are often used to control them. Pathogens include fungi, bacteria, viruses, viroids, and mycoplasmas. It should also be noted that plant parasitic seed plants and nematodes are sometimes considered plant disease agents because of the type of injury they cause to host plants. It also should be noted that some causes of plant disease are not living at all, but are conditions in which they change the normal behavior of plants or normal appearance of plants. And because of that, in trying to control living plant pathogens, sometimes these things get in the way and are determining what the cause is of a particular plant disease. Pathogens that cause plant disease are parasites that live and feed on plant debris and on or in host plants. Many can be passed from one plant to another. 3 factors are required before a pathogenic disease can develop: a susceptible host plant, a pathogenic agent, and an environment favorable for development of the pathogen. A pathogenic disease depends on the life cycle of the parasite and on environmental conditions. Temperature and moisture, for example, affect the activity of the parasite, the ease with which a plant becomes diseased, and the way the disease develops. The disease process starts when the parasite arrives at a part of the plant where infection can occur. If environmental conditions are favorable, the parasite will begin to develop. If the parasite enters the plant, the infection starts. The plant is diseased when it responds to the parasite. The 3 main ways a plant responds are overdevelopment of tissue, such as galls, swellings, and leaf curls; underdevelopment of tissue, such as stunning, lack of chlorophyll, and incomplete development of organs; and death of tissue, such as blights, leaf spots, wilting, and cankers. One very well-known group of plant disease agents are fungi. And fungi are actually plants that lack chlorophyll and cannot make their own food. And because they can't make their own food, they either have to live on other organisms or they have to live by decaying organic matter. And they can be quite beneficial in this form, but in other cases they can cause problems. In the case of desirable wood in our structures and lumber, they can cause many problems in situations where there's high humidity and water by rotting that desirable wood, or even discoloring it. Other fungi can cause plant diseases in their form as parasites, and they can either attack plants and plant products, both above and below the soil surface, either attack many species, or they may be restricted to just one host species. Most fungi reproduce with spores, and spores are somewhat similar to the way seeds function in plants, and because of spores being well known to be able to move, they can become airborne and they can move in water. They are well known to spread plant disease and cause the fungi to move off one site to another. Also, fungal infections are often identified by the vegetative body of the fungus, the mycelium, and the fruiting bodies that are produced by the spores. Usually the mycelia are not visible to the naked eye, and of course you need, and are not always easily identified. The symptoms of fungal infections include rots and stunning and smuts, rusts, leaf spots, wilting, thickening and curling of leaves, just a variety of different signs and symptoms. Bacteria are microscopic one-celled organisms. They usually reproduce by single-cell division. Each new cell is exactly like the parent cell. Bacteria can build up quickly under warm, humid weather conditions. Some can divide every 30 minutes. Bacteria may attack any part of the plant, either above or below the ground. Many leaf spots and rots are caused by bacteria. The viruses, viroids, and mycoplasmas have a lot of similarity. They're extremely small. They can't be seen with an ordinary microscope. They're generally recognized for their effects on plants, and often it's very difficult to distinguish between diseases caused by viruses and mycoplasmas and viroids and those caused by other plant disease agents such as fungi and bacteria. The viruses and the viroids and the mycoplasmas are living organisms, but they depend on other living organisms for food, like any parasite, and to reproduce. They can't exist separately from the host for very long. But they're commonly spread from plant to plant by disease vectors, such as insects of various types and insect-like pests such as mites, and even nematodes for that matter. If you try to control a plant disease without having enough information about it, you will usually fail. The first step in disease management is to diagnose the disease correctly. You can recognize the disease plants by comparing them with healthy plants. To recognize the disease condition, you must know the plant's normal growth habits. When you're trying to identify the cause of the plant disease, you need to observe the symptoms. And the symptoms are the host plant's reaction to the disease agent. And the signs. The signs are the visible presence of the disease agent. Many plant diseases cause similar symptoms in the host plants. Such things as leaf spots, wilts, galls on roots, or stunted growth may be caused by many different agents, including many that are not pathogens. For example, the symptoms may be a result of mechanical injury, improperly applied fertilizers and pesticides, or frost. Often, the only way to pinpoint the cause is by finding the observable signs that a particular disease agent is present, such as fungal spores and mycelium or bacterial ooze. Some pathogenic diseases occur regularly on specific agricultural, ornamental, and forestry plantings. For these diseases, noticing specific symptoms may be enough to allow you to correctly identify the cause. But many less common pathogenic disease agents, including some fungi and bacteria, may have to be positively identified by an expert with access to sophisticated laboratory procedures. In general, plant disease control measures are mainly preventative. Once a plant or plant product is infected and symptoms appear, few control methods, including pesticides, are effective. The main methods to control plant disease include host resistance, cultural control, mechanical control, sanitation, and chemical control. Host resistance is usually one of the most effective ways to control plant disease. For a plant disease to develop, a pathogen and its host must come together under the right environmental conditions. Cultural practices can prevent an infection by altering the environment, the condition of the host, and the behavior of the pathogen. Examples include crop rotation. Pathogenic organisms can usually carry over from one growing season to the next in the soil or in plant debris. Continual production of the same or closely related crops on the same piece of land leads to disease buildup. Crop rotation reduces the buildup of pathogens but seldom provides complete disease control. Planting time. Cool weather crops such as spinach, peas, and some turf grass are subject to attack by certain diseases if planted when the temperatures are warm. They often emerge and establish poorly under these conditions. Conversely, beans, melons, and many flowers should be planted under warm conditions to avoid disease. Seed aging. Some seed pathogens can be killed by holding the seed in storage. Proper storage conditions are essential to ensure that the seed viability is not lowered. Another type of control is mechanical control. Heat kills many pathogens. In greenhouses, soil sterilized by heat helps control some plant diseases. Hot water treatments are effective in producing clean seed and planting materials. Seed and vegetative propagation materials such as roots, bulbs, corms, and tubers may be treated before planting to control some fungal, bacterial, and viral diseases. In greenhouses and other enclosed growing areas, as well as in areas where food and feed are stored, you may be able to control temperature and humidity to keep pathogens from building up rapidly enough to cause disease. Another type of control is sanitation. Sanitation practices help to prevent and suppress some plant diseases by removing the pathogens themselves or their sources of food and shelter. Examples of sanitation include the use of pathogen-free seed stock. Using clean seed stock is an important way to reduce the spread of plant disease. Seeds are often grown in arid areas where the amount of moisture is controlled by an irrigation system. This eliminates infection by diseases that require high moisture and humidity levels. Pathogen-free propagation. Plant disease pathogens are frequently carried in or on vegetative propagation materials, such as roots, bulbs, corms, tubers, and cuttings. Use of clean planting stock is especially important in the culture of certain high-value agricultural and ornamental crops. These stock plants must be grown in pathogen-free greenhouses or in sites isolated from growing areas for these crops. When you plan for isolation, consider how far the pathogen may spread, how the pathogen is spread, and the distance between potential growing sites. Pathogen-free storage. To control disease in food and feed storage areas, you must first have good sanitation in the facility before storage. Then be sure the crop is relatively pathogen-free at the time it is put into storage. Clean planting sites. In some crops, you can control or reduce certain plant disease pathogens by eliminating other nearby plants that are hosts for the same disease organisms. These may be plants that harbor the pathogens, such as weeds around field borders, ditch banks, and hedgerows, or plants the organism requires for one stage of its life cycle. An apple grower, for example, can control cedar apple rust by eliminating nearby cedar or juniper trees. Removing crop residue. Infected crop residues often provide an ideal environment for carryover of many pathogens. In some cases, the pathogens increase greatly in residues. Three basic techniques are used to manage crop residues. Deep plowing buries pathogen-infested residues in surface soil and replaces them with soil that is relatively free from pathogens. Fouling reduces carryover of pathogens because their food source decays and is no longer available. Burning kills some pathogens and removes the residue they live on. Burning may not be legal in some areas, of course. Removing infected plants. You often can control diseases by systematically removing infected plants or plant parts before the disease pathogen spreads or to other clean plants. This method is especially important for control of some viral and mycoplasma pathogens for which no other controls are available. And finally, disinfecting equipment and tools. Some plant diseases can be spread from plant to plant, field to field, and crop to crop by workers and their equipment. Disinfecting the equipment, the tools, and the clothing with a product such as bleach, which is sodium hypochlorite, before moving from an infected area to a disease area that's free of disease, can prevent or delay disease spread. This method of disease spread is especially important in high humidity and wet field conditions because the pathogens are transported in the droplets of water that form on the equipment, tools, and skin. Chemical control. Chemicals used to control plant disease pathogens include fungicides and bactericides, and sometimes we call the bactericides disinfectants. The general term fungicide is often used to describe pesticides that combat both fungi and bacteria, by the way. Some points that we need to make here. One is fungicides vary in the length of time they remain active after they are applied. A non-persistent fungicide controls the pathogen on contact or shortly after that, and then it is no longer chemically active against the plant disease. Sometimes we call these fungistats, and you might hear that terminology. A persistent fungicide can retain its chemical effectiveness for a period of time after application. And the chemical label will tell you how frequently you have to apply the product. The interval may depend not only on the persistence of the pesticide, but also on the environmental conditions and whether you'll have rainfall irrigation, watering that might wash off the fungicide from plant surfaces, etc. Now we consider the way that fungicides work on plant pathogens is their mode of action, and there's a variety of different modes of action that relate to fungicidal action. For example, protectants must be applied before or during infection of the plant by the pathogen. In order to be effective, a protected fungicide must either be persistent or be applied repeatedly. Most chemicals now available to combat plant diseases are protectants. Often we're getting more chemicals out there, and one of the areas is something called eradicants, and they're less common, but they can be applied after infection has occurred. They act on contact by killing the organism or by preventing its further growth and reproduction. Systemics are used to kill disease organisms on living plants. Systemic chemicals are transported in the sap stream from the application site to other plant parts. This type of chemical may act both as a protectant and an eradicant. So we see that terminology, sometimes we see that terminology in other areas, including in some insecticides as well. But it's the way that the chemical is being carried to the plant, and so that's why we call it systemic. One thing that's important is that successful control of plant diseases depends on proper timing and proper coverage. Adequate coverage particularly is very important because a lot of fungicides are protectants, and you're dependent on that barrier to keep the pathogen from infesting the plant and infecting the plant. And then the application methods, and then the issue of the persistence and that mode of action all play in here.
This is the end of part 1 on insects and insect-like pests and plant disease agents. Continue to part 2.
Okay, you all go to sleep?
Not yet, but there are red marks on foreheads.
I understand. That is one of the most heavily content areas that Dr. Weaver does in that whole thing, and it's a little bit like Tyler says, he's a little bit monotone with it. So, but there's an enormous amount of content for the whole class that's involved in that 42 minutes right there. So, you know, if we need to, we can try to, you know, field any questions that you have about that. But it all works and stems around a lot of these definitions that we've been talking about, you know, for the whole semester. So, you know, when we talk about this, don't hesitate to ask me questions about it. You know, it's a lot of stuff. as you begin to think about it. And as we're talking about pests and pest control, the idea that he gives you that you've got to be able to identify what's causing the problem is one of your greatest challenges. You know, I get questions, particularly in the springtime, by folks that are growing plants for their garden, particularly some of the little greenhouses that I deal with, and they'll have plants that they say the broccoli's got holes in it, or the cabbage has got holes in it. He says, but we don't see any worms or anything on it. But it's the slugs that are causing the problem.
They come out at night and eat them.
They come out at night or eating those plants. So, you know, it's a complicated thing. We talk about problems with squash and pumpkin and cantaloupe vines, and all of a sudden they'll look great today, and tomorrow they're wilted and dying. But it's because there was a squash bug that happened to bite it and inflict a bacteria in it that moved through the entire sap system and caused that plant to wilt and die. So, you know, identification is a real key to any of this stuff. So, we won't have time to do the other one, but the other film that goes with it, I think Pat Hipkins does, so it may not be quite informative to you, but you know, we'll knock off for today and let you try to absorb some of that. And if you need me, don't hesitate to pull my chain and let me see if I can help you with some of this stuff. Okay. Any questions?
Yeah, she's got one.
Yeah.
So what would you say would be the best preventative maintenance for a greenhouse?
Preventive for a greenhouse?
Yes, just in general. I know that's a really broad question.
It's a broad question, but the term sanitation?
The sanitation,
Yep. If you will keep it
I,
pristine of condition as you can, you don't have the places for the slugs and the things to hide. And that's one of the biggest things. You keep all the old dead plant material out. You won't have white flies. You won't have places for aphids. White flies, aphids, vinegar gnats are things that thrive on old plant material or old plants or things. So, you know, if you're dealing with a greenhouse, keep it as disease and pest free as possible. And that's all what we're talking about with sanitation.
yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay? Good question, though. Anybody else?
You mentioned a few times a parasitic wasp. What are those?
A parasitic wasp is just as what it says. It is itself a parasite. In other words, it is a wasp that will feed on another insect. It acts as a parasite and quite often will kill either a squash bug or something of that type. We've also got, he didn't mention it specifically, but mites are a major problem on a lot of plants. And there is a little ladybug, a little black ladybug that's really small, but it's called a Staphylococcus punctum. And the larval stage of the Staphylococcus punctum will eat more mites and mite eggs than you can kill with a spray.
What do parasitic wasps look like? Do they have long
There's
tails?
a bunch of different species of parasitic wasps.
What is one that, it's about the size roughly of a dragonfly and has a long tail trailing behind it? What is that?
That's another dragonfly.
It's dragonfly?
There's a lot of species of those. And they primarily eat mosquitoes.
I was just wondering because I saw one of those things buzzing around the other day, and it had the coloring of a wasp, but it, you know, looked, for all intents and purposes, like a dragonfly.
It's just another species of dragonfly. And he was hunting for a mosquito. That's what they like. They really eat a lot of mosquitoes.
Okay.
Okay, you guys. See you on Wednesday.
Okay, bye.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, John. Gotta behave.
That's a lot.